Karibuni na asanteni for joining us on Kumbukeni today. My brothers Milton Adesoji and myself are joined today by Dr. Mohamed Noor Hussein, who is the chairman of the United African Congress. Welcome, Dr. Mohamed, and thank you for joining us as we speak on one of our African countries that has been fraught with conflict for centuries, for too long, and we need to find solutions, or at least help find solutions. Brother Ali Mahdi, Brother Adesoji, please introduce yourselves, and then we'll have Brother Mohamed introduce himself. Yes, indeed.
From the belly of the United States beast, from the belly of the declining empire, soon to be replaced by another empire, but I won't mention which empire. I don't want them to come following me. I'm Milton Ali Mahdi. Welcome, sisters and brothers. And as always, our guest today is going to give us some historical context. And that's the advantage of coming to Kumbukeni.
Yes. Yeah, Brother Ali Mahdi is coming with that fighting spirit. Come on, Adesoji. Let's see what you got.
Okay. Yes. Good evening, everybody. Again, from the belly of the beast, the mother of all empires, the British Empire from London, United Kingdom. All other empires are just copycats.
Imperialist in chief.
So
that's true.
So, I mean, we give the world the language you are all speaking right now. So you should be proud. So, yes, welcome again to Kumbukeni, as we're joined by a very, very distinguished guest, Dr. Mohamed Husseini. So, without further ado, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, I like what Adesoji said about giving us the language. There's a documentary called China's Influence on Zambia. And there's a taxi driver complaining about all the signs are now in Chinese, but he was complaining in English. He didn't even realize it.
Yeah, and the audience, you will excuse us because our brother's internet is acting up this morning. He's frozen, but I'd rather he be here than be on audio, so we'll continue as is. Dr. Mohamed, as you introduce yourself, it's only right that we let you proceed with introducing us to the history of Sudan as an opening to our conversation. So please introduce yourself, and you can take us on how Sudan came to be and why the conflict and how this conflict has been sustained for this long, and what you think can be done.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. My name is Mohamed Noor Hussein. I'm originally from another smaller belly of the beast, the imperial state of Ethiopia. And I am a physician, retired now, and also chairman of the United African Congress. And so I would straight go to the topic that's at hand. Being a neighbor of Sudan and sort of an amateur student of history from my days as a student, I have been following events in Sudan as far back as its independence. Many of us forget that Sudan actually is the first independent state in Africa. In 1956, it gained its independence, and it had an elected government with Prime Minister Ismail al-Azhari, but only 4 years after that, the military intervened in a coup, General Aboud. And that has set the stage for a series of coups and military governments interspersed with brief periods of civilian rule. The Aboud's regime was forced to resign after a series of really massive protests throughout Sudan. In fact, the Communist Party of Sudan, which many consider probably the most influential in the Arab world and African world at the time, was at the center of those protests, along with, which is unique for Sudan, a professional class. Doctors, lawyers, teachers, engineers are at the center of those protests, along with the students and workers. And the tradition has continued until the overthrow of al-Bashir. So to come back to after a period of military government with Nimeri and so on, we all know that it was the al-Bashir who, with the help of a charismatic kind of a theologian, Hassan al-Turabi, sort of created an alliance and established a military Islamist kind of government. And while the southern Sudan has been, of course, protesting all along the rule of the regime coming from the north, but with the Communist Party and also mediation of Haile Selassie, as a matter of fact, in the early 70s, there was an understanding that Sudan will preserve its unity, but the idea of introducing Islamic kind of tenets of government, I mean, Sharia and all that, precipitated really the rapid, dissolution of Sudan in terms of the South didn't want anything to have with it, which is basically non-Muslim, and that led to independence of Southern Sudan, of course. So al-Bashir, of course, fell out with al-Turabi eventually, as always is the case, and that will bring us to today's event, in fact, to current events, and has been actually dictator essentially, but it is the war in Darfur that precipitated his demise, really. The war in Darfur has been genocidal, nothing short of a genocide, and it has been accepted as such by the international community. And al-Bashir created, when the military was really bogged down in Darfur, the resistance in Darfur was, not amenable to complete, subjugation. And but he created this militia, known as Janjaweed, actually established by then Camel trader, current general Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, often known as Mehmeti. And it was the Janjaweed coming from the north on the Camel unit, really coming down to the south and just simply destroying villages, killing people, raping women, and created a massive humanitarian crisis, many fleeing to neighboring Chad and so on. So these two, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and Hemeti, were serving in Darfur at the time. Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, of course, mid-level military officer. That one irregular with his Janjaweed, notorious. And actually, after this lull in Darfur, al-Bashir, I like the way a journalist put it, to coup-proof his regime, actually, made the irregular Janjaweed into the rapid support force and to the rise of Hemeti. So it was a parallel military organization in addition to the national military. The national military, as represented by Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, and the RSF, or Rapid Support Services now, some consider close to 100,000 strong, under Hemeti. Now, the interesting thing about the military in Sudan, as is many parts of Africa that have emerged from, armed resistance to colonialism and or come by coup, the military, once in power, actually controls, involves itself in the economic life of the country. controlling some of the major sectors of the economy, as it's the case in Algeria, in Egypt, in everywhere where the military has power. And so Hemeti basically owns much of the gold, many of the gold mines in Sudan. He has become considered arguably the richest man in Sudan.
In Sudan, yeah.
Yeah, in Sudan. So have the other generals who have come around, because it's just they are out there for the loot, and they are not answerable to the basically legally established government. They have their own economic power, and so after al-Bashir was overthrown. By the way, I just want to go back to the events before al-Bashir was overthrown. There was continuous, unrelenting resistance to al-Bashir, protest after protest after protest. Again, led by the same group that brought down Aboud back in the 60s, the professional group, students, the workers, and so on. And Hemeti was sent to quell the protests, and he has massacred protesters actually during those. And even after they took over, when things looked bad for al-Bashir, Hemeti quickly switched sides and formed an alliance with the National Army, Mohammed al-Burhan, and the two of them actually now established a military government. The protests did not stop. Rapid Special Force Support Services continued to, shoot at the protesters and kill, but eventually they were forced to establish a military civilian transitional government under the internationally recognized diplomat and economist Hamdok. And that lasted for a while. There was hope that eventually the idea was to prepare the country back to constitutional government and democratic government, prepare it for elections and so on. But again, as that date was approaching in 2021, these two generals staged a coup against the transitional government and established a purely military with Mohammed Abdel Fattah al-Burhan as the president, this one as vice president. And they have kind of found modus vivendi, although they were both angling for taking eventually the power out by themselves. During this period, the support was coming mostly from Egypt, but financial support from UAE and Saudi Arabia, particularly UAE, who tended to favor the Hemeti. In any case, during the war in Yemen, Sudanese forces were sent. They became essentially mercenaries for UAE. They were sent to fight in Yemen, and so that connection is important to remember. I mean, because there is Sudan actually stretches over a large area. It borders 7 countries, very large countries, and also has a long Red Sea coastline, which is now coveted by regional and global powers for us in that area. The Red Sea basin is really going to be, along with the Horn of Africa, is becoming a sort of strategic, of strategic importance to many of the former and emerging powers. So it was al-Burhan who felt that there would be no room for 2 armies, and the RSF should be integrated into the. That has been understood to be integrated, but Hemeti kind of has demurred. He said maybe he needed 10 years or so to
it sounds like a struggle for power by a bunch of African men in
It is
Sudan.
basically a struggle of power between these two people with their regional and global backers, each one of them. And so it is. When I say regional, by the way, if you remember at the outbreak of this fighting between the RSF and the Sudanese army, RSF or Hemeti claimed that the Egyptians surrendered to him at the outbreak. And it's interesting because that should be, because you wonder, what are the Egyptians doing there? Well, the Egyptians and the Sudanese have been actually conducting military exercise for a long time now, with Egypt having a base there, it is said, with the idea of perhaps attacking Ethiopia over the Nile dam. So that's and now these two generals, they have immense wealth to protect, and one of them has to be. They cannot share power.
Obviously.
So, as we speak of those, Dr. Mohammed, thank you so much for taking us through that short historical brief.
Brilliant history.
Thank you, and giving us the foundation for the conversation, Brother Ali Mahdi. We know that from the research we're doing, from reading, from hearing in the news, a lot of times the conflict that is put in the forefront is this Islamic Christian conflict. But we, through our experience, have seen that there's much more to this conflict in Sudan than just the religion and men fighting for power. So if you can speak a little more on what your findings have shown you and what your experience has shown you in Sudan, as far as what else is firing up this conflict.
My outline, can you hear me clearly?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's very similar to what Comrade Dr. Mohammed just presented. So I would actually want to ask him a few specific questions.
Okay.
Given your knowledge of the history and the other neighboring countries that may also be involved in some intrigue, do you fear, Dr. Mohammed, that we could have the potential of another Somalia developing here? Or at least a stalemate where Sudan itself is now partitioned into two zones, one controlled by Hamdan and the other by Burhan? Or do you think at the end of the day, either one will take out the other, or both will take themselves out and the civilians would emerge? What's your reading?
I like the third option. All of those are all of those possibilities are really, they are possibilities. These two people really have no scruples. They are fighting with heavy weapons in the capital city. In fact, during the month of Ramadan, when people are fasting and are trying to, for 7 or 8 days, they have no access to water. They have not been able to get out or buy necessities. So they are fighting in the middle of an urban area. This is unheard of by military forces of their own government, whatever country. And so I think any of those three possibilities could happen. My hope is that these two guys will knock each other out, and hopefully there will be a very progressive civilian government could emerge out of that. Sudan has a very well developed sense of civic kind of civic society, and an educated class, and a politically very, very astute and vigilant population. So I'm hoping that they would rise up against these people. And frankly, unless one destroys the other, I don't see any possibility of this conflict ending, because they zero sum kind of game between the two. One has to come out triumphant and eliminate the other. Abdel Fattah al-Burhan has said as much. You can either take me out in a coffin, or I cannot allow me to.
Exactly.
So that's the kind of
zero-sum game.
Zero-sum game. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, Ali Mahdi, did you have any other questions or any other observations?
Well, I'm still thinking we could end up with a Beirut type. Remember Beirut in the battle 70s and 80s? Urban fighting for decades. And the entire city decimated, Over to you, Comrade Adesoji.
Brother Adesoji.
Okay, yes. I would like to bring in a bit of colonial history.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Brother Hussein will back me up. If you recall, even in a book we read recently, how hate is manufactured by the media, by Brother Milton Anibade, he talks on the battle of the Mahdis against General Gordon. And Darfur was the epicenter of that battle. And as a result, the British decided to defund that particular area and make it what they called a closed district. So which means Khartoum would defund that particular area. You're left to your own devices, and they ceded power to local regional heads. Now, fast forward into modern times. Guys back there in Darfur wanted element of power, and so they didn't have money. So what they then did was they pledged loyalty to whoever was willing to pay the highest amount of money to them, insofar as going after their enemies. Why is that important? It is important in the sense that these present guys, the Janjaweed, your RSF, they've taken out 2 leaders. They actually partook in the elimination of Gaddafi. Funny enough, Gaddafi actually sponsored them as well. So Bashir turned them against Gaddafi. Now they've turned against Bashir. So now the 2 of them are in the center. Unfortunately, the people, as the old African proverb goes, he says, when 2 elephants fight, it's the grass that suffers. Now, the question is, what is the benefit to the people with UAE, Saudi Arabia, the United Kingdom, and the USA creating this imaginary battle that the Russians are coming as a means of taking people's eyes away from what is going on in Sudan, wherein we're actually talking about a people-led revolution that is being stifled by the greed of 2, Hemeti and Bohan. So if you could explain what is the benefit to the people on the ground at the moment?
I'm glad you went back to the history of the Darfur and the British colonial administration, because the seeds of all these conflicts have been sown, as we know, by the British, uniquely British, whether it's in India or here, or you name it. I am afraid Sudan has become too important strategic place for the U.S. And its local allies in that area to be left alone. I think even if the people were to rise up against these generals, I think the Sudan, I'm afraid, would still be
unstable.
And it may end up really becoming, fragmented with, or it may end up a failed state, as in Sudan, Somalia, and other places, and Ethiopia, by the way. I mean, Ethiopia is, in no better situation right now with the two largest ethnic groups, Oromos and Amharas, now, looking to really push it out, push it out. So it is, so that whole region is really going to be destabilized. We're not talking about Sudan here alone. And what happens in Sudan is likely to have reverberations not only in Ethiopia directly, but in Uganda and Libya to the north, and Chad to the west, and I mean, you name it. So it sits right at the heart of Africa, really. I mean, how this instability would engulf all these other countries, with the riches of Africa concentrated all the way down to the Congo, is anyway. It's really too big a price, to dividend really for the imperialist powers to be left alone. And Sudan seems to be the beginning of. I hope we are wrong in all of this, but of destabilizing that whole region for the exploitation of the area.
Yeah.
So as we talk about destabilizing them, I want to get into the other causes that are bringing this conflict. But as we do that, we talk about the destabilizing of Sudan. Who does it benefit for Sudan to be the way it is? I mean, we see there are two gentlemen who are fighting for personal reasons, but who else does it benefit? And who is providing the weaponry? You're saying they're using heavy weapons in the urban area. Who's providing the weaponry? Who is keeping this fire burning, other than the two gentlemen in Sudan? And yeah, there's nothing gentle about them. Brother Limadi Adisoji, Dr. Mohammed, anyone?
I mean, the weapons are coming from the regular armory of the armed forces. I mean, every country's armed forces, has an armory where they store weapons meant to protect the country from foreign invasion. So that's what the weapons are meant.
But who's giving weaponry to the militias? To the
I mean, the militia is not a typical militia. It was another army, as Dr. Mohammed said, that was built up
as a counterweight
by Bashir when he was president, because he wanted to have two armies.
Yes.
So that one of them could not overthrow him, because they would know that there's another one there. So they were supposed to counterbalance, each other. But when the civilian protests became just too huge, the armies, joined together and saying, okay, we have to get rid of him now. They got together for the first time. But now, after getting rid of him, they went the two separate ways. I want to just point a little bit on what Dr. Mohammed said in terms of the destabilization. Yeah, you have a situation which is already very, very unstable, number one, right?
Yes. And
in terms of the coastline, that's a very strategic location. Not only Sudan, by the way, Somalia, That's why Somalia has not been stable for a very long time, because, the foreign interests don't want a stable Somalia, so they can control that whole coastline. So it's a possibility that now Sudan could end up in a similar type of situation. Somalia cannot even control its waters, So look at the so-called piracy. The Somalis were being depicted as pirates, when in fact the pirates were coming with big ships to steal $1 billion worth of fish from Somalia's waters.
Yeah.
So yes, I think Dr. Mohammed is very right that in terms of the outside powers, if Sudan is in a controlled level of instability, that's precisely what they want. So, unfortunately, the military in not only Sudan but in all these African countries, I agree with Walter Rodney when he said the military are just the uniform version of the same useless elite,
Yes.
The bourgeois elite. And when the military, the people in uniform said, "Oh, if the civilians can control through autocracy, we are better qualified to do it, right?" And that's what they're doing in many of these countries. And now that's what sadly we're seeing right now in Sudan as well.
Yeah. Adeso, do you have anything to add to what Brother Alimari just said?
Yes. With regards to the weapons, we also have to go back a bit in history. In the 1980s, one of the countries next to Sudan was having a battle with their northern neighbor in terms of, we're talking Chad and Libya over the Auzo Strip. One of the defining battles of that was the capture of a garrison town called Duame Ama. Duame Ama happened to be the armory town, the southern armory town for Libya. So all that weapons was captured. And he also brought into the popular notion of how, you notice the brother said the Janjaweed was founded by a camel merchant.
Yes.
When their transition onto jeeps was as a result of the victory that they won in that battle in Auzo Strip, where they used light jeeps with mounted guns on it. And it became the rapid way of moving on troops, on conventional troops. And that system of attack was then moved back into Darfur. So all of that weapon is awash there. And then you also have to understand that Idris Deby feels slighted by the fact that Omar Bashir did not support him when he was fighting Muammar Gaddafi. So there's a bit of coming back, like, I am going to pay you back. So all that weapons came back in. The guy that brought them back in actually was led by a general named General Khalil. He was killed. His brother took over. His brother was also killed, which is where Hemeti came in to the picture. So it's almost like a continuation of a sad drama.
Yeah. I mean, is it? I'm getting a little frustrated as I listen to the three of you speak, because to me, when I listen to what you're saying, it sounds like ego, male ego that is going on. Because you're telling me some person in Chad is upset because he didn't get support, so he decides to let the weapons come into to Sudan. You're telling me that someone in the north wants to be the leader, and therefore he's fighting. Someone has ownership of the gold mines and they want to keep that, and therefore they're fighting amongst each other. Like, really, these world are falling apart because of men with their ego?
But is that news in Africa?
No, but come on, like, we as the people, like,
unfortunately in Africa that's not news.
That's not news.
Do you hear how ridiculous this sounds? Like,
but it's not.
Countries are falling apart, and people.
I personally think we are better off if we analyze it from both a geopolitical angle as well as from a class relationship type.
Okay.
And Sudan fits the class narrative perfectly, because what you have in Sudan, as Dr. Mohammed outlined, you have a very vibrant, perhaps one of the most vibrant in the entire African continent, left politics, left political parties, whether they're socialist, whether they're Marxist, and then you have highly educated professionals who have their unions. So they've had a legitimate government in waiting all these years, right? But the military are the uniform version, as I said, of the hopeless civilian bourgeoisie elite, whose interests are much more aligned with foreign elements. The perfect World Bank IMF model. To have a neoliberal regime in an African country, they'll accept some of the prescriptions from the World Bank and IMF. Boom. Do rather sustain them than have a government made of the students, the professional classes, the left parties, and so forth. I think that is what's actually happening in the Sudan.
As you mentioned class, we have to go into economics because that's what sustains class. And we know that, and it goes back to Adesoji with colonialism, how this all starts, where the North is favored over the South, despite the fact that the South is the one producing the resources, and the North has control of the resources, and they're benefiting only the North and not the South. Could you please, Dr. Mohammed, you can start, and my brothers will join you in this, talk about that, the resources, how the North has taken control of the resources in the South, and they don't share the profits that come from them.
Yeah, I would do that. And just to go back to the proliferation of arms earlier, I think right now there is a war, a battle raging on for the control of the armament industry in Sudan between Hemeti's forces and the National Army. The destabilization of Libya actually has been really hugely destabilizing in the entire, northern half of the country, of the continent. Right. The arms, not only did it flow into Sudan or Chad. I mean, we have the Sahel countries, Nigeria and Mali and Burkina Faso, Niger. So the destabilizing factor of this really is huge. I mean, so that's one thing. But the Sudanese, as Comrade Milton earlier mentioned, has a very vibrant left political class. It is and has been really, regardless of the oppression, regardless of the military regime that comes and goes, they have been, always there and resisting, and they will continue to resist. But there are many outside sponsors of these groups. Closer to home in Sudan is the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, who already had a role in as proxy for the larger powers, European powers, and then European Union and the United States have destabilized Libya. They are doing the same thing in Sudan, I think. And very interesting enough, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, a couple of days ago, was actually talking to the renegade general in Libya, who is controlled by the what's the name?
Hifter.
Right.
Yeah, Hifter. Yeah.
So you wonder what the hell is going on here. And then you have another.
Dr. Mohammed, if I can interrupt a little bit, he was also talking to U.S. Secretary of State Blinken.
Yeah,
so
Blinken.
Tie that in your analysis as well.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So it is a complex issue. While we can talk about the geostrategic importance of that region for the powers, for the major powers. Specifically, I think European Union is even more so here because, you may recall, I mean, they were actively involved in the, they just don't want an influx of refugees coming on their doorsteps, so they want to keep,
You would think they would want peace. You would think they would want peace for that.
But at a price, yeah. So, I don't know what was the question actually, how we started doing this. But
the question is the class system that they have there, and I connect it to the economics where the North is getting all the resources and developing the North and not developing the South. Therefore, the South is feeling cheated out of
Although that led to the separation of, now you have South Sudan.
South Sudan,
Yes. South Sudan. It's going to be, unfortunately, this problem is going to be with us for a long time. I mean, we have local actors and global actors here. The global ones are the ones that are actually, holding the strings. using domestic. What did you used to call them? Domestic, yeah.
The
mercenaries, or
well,
talking about the class,
representations of those countries,
neo-colonial class.
whether it could be, working on the behalf of those larger, bigger,
black-faced colonialists,
imperialist powers.
Neo-colonialists,
and that remained the case. I mean, the tragic. We're talking about Sudan here. I mean, the most tragic situation that has been ever since independence is DRC, the Congo.
Yes.
I mean, maybe the richest country possibly in the world, that is also one of the poorest countries. And yet the riches are flowing out, not to local enablers in neighboring countries, Rwanda and Uganda.
Right.
But the larger beneficiaries of these riches are the imperialist powers of Europe and the United States, and so that, as long as that continues to be the case, I don't know how there should be really. A revolution is needed in Africa.
Definitely, without a doubt. In fact, it's
funny
you say
that.
Brother Milton started. That's the conversation we were having the other day.
And we will get to that, brother.
This specific show.
Brother Milton.
Without my influence, Dr. Muhammad uttered the same words that I did a few days ago when we were doing a planning meeting for this.
You know what? Why don't you just get into it? Please talk to us about that, please. And connect
really,
it
because
to
think
that.
about it. If you have two generals willing to unleash missiles at targets in their own country, their own capital city, what kind of mentality do you think they really have? They're completely unaware, or they don't care about,
like Fela calls it, colonial mentality.
Yeah, they either don't understand or are not interested in class analysis, right? Like Sankara would never ever do something like that, because Sankara understood class analysis. He understood where the powers really are, and understood that some things that we just can't do if we really want to have power in Africa. Now these guys have taken Sudan decades back to recover. Because when you unleash this kind of violence, it's going to promote violence in other parts of the country. It's going to promote violence in neighboring parts of the country, because now other groups are going between the borders, getting strength from other. It's going to be cross. All the people who operate outside the system are going to be cross-fertilizing from each other,
Brother Adesoji, the class system, the resources, who gets them, who doesn't get them?
Well, Sudan, Sudan with its placement in Africa is almost like if you have a T-shirt, Sudan will be the breast pocket of your T-shirt, the position. So you could see, if you bring your hand from the top and you dip it in, by that I'm saying countries like Egypt, countries like Saudi Arabia from across the sea.
Great analogy.
And
all the Gulf states, right?
Exactly. Now, if you then look closer at Sudan itself, Sudan has a vein running through it from the south. And the vein comes in from two countries, actually. It comes in from South Sudan and from Chad to the port of Sudan. And they're both pipelines. So oil found in Chad has to go to the sea. Oil found in South Sudan also has to go to the sea. So the pipeline passed through Khartoum, right? There's a refinery there. They will take what they need. The rest has to go to the sea. Now, the power to control that pipeline lies in one of the reasons why we have this melee we currently have. Because other than that, and aside from the gold mines, people agriculture,
we'll get into agriculture,
let's not forget the fact that you have the Nile, one of the richest basins, food basket basins in the world, in the Nile. So, class. Who gets to control what? Funny enough, just like Dr. Hussein said, it's not so much that people want to control anything. People will just want to get on with their lives.
Yeah.
But it's oftentimes than not, it's people with just the power of the gun who want to dictate how things are run, which in a novel society should not be the case. So, which is what we're looking at in Sudan. We've tried to have a civilian rule in Sudan. I mean, there was one in the early 60s.
Al-Bashir was the one, right?
No. Okay. Al-Bashir
wasn't.
Al-Bashir is a general. He's a military
But he
guy.
switched and he under civilian rule he led.
Well, you call it what it is, but it's not.
The trickery. I call it the trickery of Sudan.
Yeah. No.
I think, guys, you're just making it unnecessarily complicated for our listeners, right? Here's the deal. In Africa,
yes,
we will never have authentic rule, whether it's by civilians or whether it's by armed forces.
But let's not say
let me finish. So long as you're not free from the control of the World Bank and IMF.
Yes.
Okay. Funny enough,
that to me is the overarching power. Funny enough, they will tolerate what they want, and when it steps beyond the boundaries, boom.
And that's a place to pause, Adesoji, as you continue. That's a place to actually pause. Go on.
No, when you say pause, actually, I was coming to the issue of the IMF.
Connect it to that, please.
Sudan also happens to be the only country in the world that will default with the IMF 8 times. 8 times. Let that register. 8 times defaulted on their loans, rearrangement plans. 8 times. So much so that even the IMF had to say, you know what, we really can't help this country.
No, but if they're allowing you to default, it means they're still engaged with you. Yes. Which means they're still controlling you.
8 times over, you let
it. Let's get our guests. I think they're monopolizing time. Let's let our guests weigh in also.
Dr. Mohammed, class.
No. I think it's a very
on the IMF and the World Bank, yes.
Well, let's not get into the IMF and the World Bank. That's the whole entire story.
We actually had a whole show.
The fact that Sudan was allowed to default 8 times means somebody is ripping the benefits out of that. So certainly not the Sudanese. They have been just continuously impoverished. I think I just want to go back to the earlier point before I leave, because you just mentioned that this is male ego driving these 2 generals.
That's what it seems to
me. And I think I'd like to come back to that, because it is really testosterone driven ego. I agree. Example that I would like to give actually is the case of Tanzania. The new president Salihu, who is came after the death of Magufuli.
Yes.
She actually brought the opposition parties invited them to come and discuss, the future of politics. And coming out of that meeting, they all came back, really singing her praise, how, welcoming, how accommodating she was. That kind of. I think it's probably there is something to be said about that.
There's a solution, Dr. Mohammed. I like it. Women must take over in Africa. Men set aside. You've had your chance. It is time for the women in Africa.
I agree with that. I agree with that 100%. Now the mechanism, where we still have very, patriarchal societies. That's a challenge. How do we get there? How do we get there?
Yeah. There's no mama who's going to let her household fall apart while she's alive. She is going to make sure that her household is running smoothly. If not for the benefit of her household, so that the other people do not talk badly about it.
Or a mama general ordering artillery pieces to be fired on a city.
No,
ordering jet fighters to unleash missiles in a city. I just mind-boggling. You put it in those terms. I have a very good friend, our mutual friend, Dr. Mohammed. Nisrin.
Yes.
Nisrin is in Sudan right now.
Yes. Were you able to get in touch with her?
I can't get her to communicate with us, but now and then she can tweet. And she's there, worst of all, with her 3-year-old daughter.
Mm-hmm.
I
running
hope she
out of
comes out.
supplies. You know.
Yeah.
But Dr.
Safe.
Mohammed can only stay for the top of the hour, so he has, because he's packing to actually travel.
So let me ask.
So maybe he can have some closing.
Yeah, we have a question from the audience. What is the point of Al Burhan's forces bombing the hospital? I mean, this is almost like a question that is answering itself, but it's something to address, and it goes back to the ego again. And maybe you can close with that.
What is the point of Burhan
the
bombing
bombing
the
of the hospitals? Like you're defeating your own interests.
Oh, what is the point of fighting in a battle in a city, in a capital city? I mean, the hospital is just happens to be part of that.
One of the many targets.
I mean, it may sound horrible to bomb a hospital, but they are actually bombing civilian installations and then in the city itself. So it's part of the casualty. I mean, this is unfortunate. I mean, this is what I mean. This is really a battle to the death between two ego-driven, really power-hungry generals. One of them has to die in order to also prevail.
Or both, as you said earlier.
Or both, yeah.
And as we joke sometimes, like, this is when I miss our medicine doctors who you could go to and ask for solutions, because we need some intervention from the spirit world on these two men. But
you can pray for it. You can
listen. I am saying my prayers on the side to the ancestors, and whichever spiritual powers can intervene, please send our brothers to their rest so that the country can heal. Brother Mohammed, any closing words, Dr. Mohammed, as you part with us?
Or any question we didn't ask you that you wanted to?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. I think it's a very important topic to really discuss. This is a crisis that has implications for too many countries around Sudan and for the continent of Africa in general. So I think it's important for us to look inwards and see what's happening here, what's happening with us, and what can we do individually and collectively, because there is a need for alternative way of thinking. Well, first of all, there are a lot of people in the leadership in many of these African countries still are, really not free of their colonial kind of mindset.
Yeah.
That's first of all. So we need to inspect our own, and then it's important to organize and mobilize the population. Important, very important. I think that are along a very progressive, principle that would benefit the people, the ordinary person. That unfortunately I don't see happening. We had a glimmer of hope with the likes of Tom Sankara, but those were certainly dangerous people that had to be eliminated. And that's the case. Every time we have made an attempt all the way back from Lumumba to Nkrumah, Sankara, and all this, it has been the response has been the same. Any leader or any group of people that stand for the welfare of the people are dangerous and inimical to the exploitation of the continent by the powers.
No, but you mentioned something interesting. Maybe one quick question before you run. Have any young progressive officers ever emerged in Sudan? Like we saw, as you mentioned, Thomas Sankara, also, of course, in Ghana, when Rawlings came with a lot of young officers as well. Have we have any similar?
I do hope. I'm glad you raised that. That's really the little glimmer of hope I entertain, in the Sudan, because there are a lot of young officers and certainly in students in universities and all that who are left-oriented for the most part. And I think if any young officer, a major or a colonel, really from within, can come out, it could be really the best of solutions for this, and then lead it to eventually a democratic transition. That's a good hope.
Yeah. To the people of Sudan,
Well,
as we get to the hour and as we continue to the half hour. Thank you, Dr. Mohammed. Have a
thank you so much. Thank you very much.
thank
Please.
you. Have a good
Thank you.
day.
Have a safe journey too, because he's
Yes.
traveling to Ethiopia.
Oh.
Yes.
Yeah, I should have asked him if he needed someone to help him carry the bags. But anyway, as we move on to the next section of our show, we thank you all for joining us. We want to invite you to join us in our Patreon community at patreon.com/Kumbukeni, or subscribe here on YouTube, youtube.com/@Kumbukeni1. And we thank you all for the support. For those of you who've joined our Patreon community, we don't always have time to respond immediately as you come in, but we really do appreciate you as we continue to do this work. We truly appreciate you. And back to Sudan, and now let's focus on that external interference. We're talking about the IMF, the World Bank, but now here come in. I think around 2001, because Kenya has been involved as a location for peace talks when it comes to Sudan a lot, and it was my surprise to see a place close to home mentioned as one of the locations where they had peace talks, Machakos in Kenya, and that was the last one they had. And as they're coming to get a good peace agreement, the US intervenes with sanctions. Can we please talk about that? US sanctions on Sudan. And for me, the thing that hit me immediately when I saw that is, I get where the US is coming from. They're talking about Sudan harboring Osama bin Laden, supporting terrorism and all that. But at the same time, this is a country that is going through a human crisis. There's economic crisis, and you add sanctions to that. Who exactly are you punishing? Can we please talk about that, brothers?
You want to go first?
No, you go ahead first.
Come on, we are
okay. So with regards to the sanction, the timing was August, in the sense that September 11 had just happened. Osama bin Laden was moving around, and he happened to have been located in Sudan, so it was only right that would happen. So I don't think it was more or less like they were anti-peace. It was more or less like they were anti-Osama bin Laden, wherever.
But it comes to a point where Sudan is now is working with them years after. They're working with them.
Sudan never really worked with the West. Never has been. And the reason I say that is Sudan has always been an outlier, which is one that the West has not really trusted in terms of where they stood. The issue with Sudan has always been one that we should never allow the Islamists to control Sudan. So when Omar Bashir took over in 89, Egypt was asked the question, what is his politics? But because he came in and he immediately put Turabi in jail. Turabi was the Mahdi in Sudan at the time. He put him in jail, the prison called Kufa. And because he put Turabi in jail, so they sort of stepped back from it. And Omar Bashir at the time was goofy. If you go back in YouTube and watch some of his earlier tapes, you would laugh. How did this guy was able to last 20 years here? It's shocking, in that neck of the woods, But yeah,
but he's good with trickery. It sounds like it. But go on.
Yeah, because he plays people against it. And again, he has studied the history. When you study history, you will know how to survive. He knew they don't have power. They want money. He has money. So, okay, you know what? I'll give you a bit of power, but here's a bit of money. Not enough so that you don't come back. Just enough so that you keep coming back to me. And so you seek validation for whatever it is. And so, series of incursions when the Janjaweed were built up by himself to create as a counterweight against the military, because he started fearing the movement of the people below him. When that force was created, it was created with the single intention of ensuring everybody but himself was the leader of Sudan. And he was able to survive for as long as he could. Now, with regards to the external aspect of it, the geopolitical, in the Nile, he has the problem with Ethiopia. And it's not the sort of problem that would negate him being afraid. But it was like, if Ethiopia armed anybody in that neck of the woods, then he has to be worried. So what he did was focus the Janjaweed anywhere he saw that people were coming in from. In Darfur, in the west of the country, in the north, the border with Egypt, by the sea. He knew the sea, he could basically see what's coming.
Yeah.
But the open land down south and east and west, he had to ensure that he knew Kenya was almost like a mommy's boy in that neck of the woods. So,
Kenyans are the good people. Uganda is the problem.
You're not so much as a good people. Not so much as a good people.
A U.S. quote unquote ally.
Exactly. So that's the point I wanted to make. You, without sounding crass, but
you can call them what they are.
No. I mean,
but we have to be careful. Even Sudan.
Yeah.
Even Sudan, it's come out that even during Bashir's time, they were actually sharing information with the United States. That's why the sanctions are just hypocritical.
Thank you. That's what I'm saying. Thank you.
They were sharing. Okay, yes.
Funny enough, they were sharing intelligence.
Funny enough, you say
remember that story?
Yeah. Funny enough, you should say they were sharing intelligence, and this is the reason they were.
Thank you.
The Qataris was bankrolling them at the time, and the Qataris saw their northern neighbor at the time, Gaddafi, as a thorn in the side of the Arab League, and they wanted to get rid of him. That is where Omar Bashir came into the picture. It wasn't so much as they were in the United States camp.
There's stories saying they were actually
connected.
In the United States camp. Yeah, these guys. I've learned now that there's no need to trust them. There's no need to trust them. Even their so-called enemies.
They use representatives and representatives of representatives and representatives of representatives to distance themselves, but it is them.
Yeah. Look, Gaddafi, whom they ultimately killed, what came out? It turns out that Gaddafi was taking prisoners from Guantanamo Bay on behalf of the U.S.
Yeah, for
secretly.
Torture. Yeah.
No, they were alive. They were in prison. They were released when they came to kill Gaddafi.
Oh, yeah. That's true.
The same people that Gaddafi was keeping on their behalf. There's one story in the Wall Street Journal, remarkable. A so-called Islamist is saying, we used to hate the United States 100%, but after this, we only hate them 25%.
The people who are in Guantanamo.
Yes.
So here's
because the U.S. released them.
Yes.
And Gaddafi said, these same people you're releasing now are going to turn against you. Mark my word. He was interviewed by, what's this so-called Africa expert? The one on CNN. The Iranian lady, I forget her name.
Christiane Amanpour.
Yes, Amanpour. Amanpour was interviewing Gaddafi. Gaddafi said this. And she sort of chuckled, like dismissed it. Guess what happened? Libya became a haven for ISIS a few months after, Gaddafi said this, and they killed him.
Yeah.
So, with these guys now, when they say, oh, so-and-so is our avowed enemy against U.S. interests, I don't even buy that anymore, you see. So
no permanent interest, no permanent enemy.
Exactly. So the sanctions are just for public relations purposes, But your sister is right. Somebody is harmed through the sanctions. Somebody's harmed.
Thank you. This business of sanctioning countries, but I'm concerned. My responsibility is Africa. The world is too big for me to be worried about the other countries. You all take care of yourselves. My concern is Africa and this business.
I mean, as much as I detest Museveni and even hope there's a insurrection at some point to get rid of him, I would never condone sanctions against Uganda.
No.
Because the most vulnerable people would end up,
And the irony, Alimadi, the irony is as they sanction Uganda, they're not taking away the resources for Museveni himself. They're actually funding him.
Right.
So the sanction is to stop the bad behavior by this leader, but you're not punishing him. You're actually still funding him. So who are you?
I think we need to find a way to mobilize even more support for the Sudanese civil resistance, I think maybe we could do a follow-up show. It's very hard to get in touch with them right now, of course, but if we could have some on our program, we could ask them what can, people that are conscious, what can they do to help you guys in the resistance,
Maybe we can put a call to action on our Twitter because they are going there, and we can do it as a response to the sister you mentioned that is stuck there. How can we help?
She's a professor. I mean, I think maybe it was their spring break.
Yes.
I don't know.
But how can we help the people on the ground in Sudan reach out to us? How can we help?
In fact, some of her recent tweets, she's asking if people can supply food to a certain region of the capital.
So there you go. Yeah. Yeah,
but the question is, how do you get the food?
How do you get the food?
Exactly, and that's the thing. How do you get there?
Lord have mercy, Black people. I say this always as a joke, but Black people are in the way of Black people's liberation. Like, we really are defeating ourselves by allowing this to continue. As I was going through it, let's talk a little bit, because we have some time, about agriculture. What the interests are there, because we know these people always like to come and use our soil for their own benefit. What's going on with agriculture in Sudan?
Sister Nisrin is the expert on that. She did her PhD on that.
The agriculture in Sudan?
Yes.
Awesome. This is the sister who is stuck in Sudan right now.
Yes, that's the subject of her doctoral thesis.
Yes.
And how all these lands have been sold to the Gulf countries.
And that's perfect continuation show.
She has the details on that, so she would be best to describe what's really going on in terms of the struggle to control the land. Yep, that was her PhD thesis.
So since we're going to hold off on that until and Adesoji, unless you want to say something about
I was going to provide an entry point there, in the sense that with regards to the agricultural aspect of it, the Nile happens to be one of the richest food basin in Africa. I mean, there are lots of them around, but
in the world, it gave us ancient Egypt, right?
Yeah, exactly, because it's the confluence of two rivers, and so you know what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. So now, how important is that place to food production? What's it called? The Gulf countries don't really have that sort of fertile soil. Yeah. But across the Red Sea, you have a place that literally you could just cross across. You could cross the rivers, you could cross the sea back and forth, and you bring in food. So what they've done is they've done reverse colonialism, which is now we would buy the land, employ you to farm same said land. We get the rich pickings. Whatever else is, we sell to you.
Yeah.
So basically, they've sold you. I mean, it's internal enslavement.
Yeah, and it's coming from both ways. And the Gulf is doing it. The World Bank is doing the same thing.
So, Sister Nisri will speak much more on that. But then, I mean, regular companies, and you'll be surprised the kind of companies that have interest in this. And another place where that is even impacted is in Kenya. The same kind of
farming.
But then it's got a British face who will take the stuff across to the Gulf. So when Kenyans push back against the land grab or seeking, so you're fighting two wars. You're fighting the war against the proxy and also against the interest behind said proxy. So
and it's funny, in Kenya now, the people who are grabbing are the people now, the neo-colonialists who've taken over after the colonial. Some colonialists De La Mare still owns land in Kenya, but the Kenyatta family is notoriously known for grabbing land in Kenya and still grabbing land to this day.
Imagine that.
There's a reason why Raila's father never became president of Kenya.
Of course.
Yeah, what's his name? Mwai Kibaki. You walk around Kenya and you see property that he's on, and you're like, how is this property just belonging to certain men? And what are they doing? Oh, they're importing products. Or is it exporting products?
Yeah.
Exporting.
I mean, Sudan.
Exporting, but the benefit goes
to them,
not to the country.
And it's also important, in terms of geopolitics in that neck of the woods. I mean, we're talking Sudan now, but we're talking about atrocities that have been carried out since 2003. I mean,
it's way before that. Yeah.
Maybe we should give him his flowers, but when George Clooney was running around screaming Darfur, 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 if only people know the extent of what happened in Darfur. Anytime these people raised their head above the parapet, it was like the good doctor said earlier. Literally, they were just destroyed. They were destroyed. So it's not for want of trying. It's not that the people are not resisting. So when people say, oh, why are the people not resisting? It's just that there is an overwhelming force against them.
Yeah.
And that overwhelming force is unrelenting. It's unrelenting. Yes, people do rise up, but it's Scotch egg tactics. They don't leave anything behind. Women, kids, anything is destroyed. So the same thing is what is going on around that neck of the woods now. You've got Uganda. Even Yoweri Museveni has a bit of a hand with the SPLA in the.
He actually had military in Sudan.
I mean, the guy is everywhere.
Yeah,
he's like a rash.
He gets $1 billion from the United States
on
official,
while his country is being sanctioned,
and he gets $1 billion from the IMF and World Bank. So you're talking $2 billion. So there's no correlation between the value of African lives. There's no correlation between human rights and democracy and assistance from the United States and friendship. Do you serve our interest and the interest of imperialism? If the answer is yes, thank you.
And a quick pause there, Brother Alimadi, for us and our audience to ask ourselves, an individual in Africa, what would these superpowers be paying $2 million to an individual to do?
Billion.
What is
$2
billion? $2 billion to an individual to give back. What is worth $2 billion when you think about economics and trade and exchange?
Okay. There's a lot, actually. Right now, the contract for the oil that the country discovered maybe about 15 years ago, the contract is going to Total Energies. Total has that contract.
I'm glad you mentioned them because we'll bring them back to Sudan.
And Total is also the 60% shareholder in the oil pipeline, which is being built from Uganda to the coast, Tanzania, to take the oil. So it's a small price to pay, $2 billion annually, to get this essentially lifetime contract for the oil in Uganda. And then, of course, Uganda's army serves as a regional police force for the United States, so that in Somalia, which the United States fears could collapse to Al-Shabaab, which the United States says is aligned with Al-Qaeda, the U.S. does not have to put a single American boots on the ground because Uganda has deployed 10,000 soldiers in Somalia. So when you have this kind of arrangement, domestically, you can kill as many as you want.
Help yourself.
You can even invade neighboring countries, which he has done. He's invaded Rwanda.
An extended military by default through Uganda.
He threatened Kenya at one point. I think at that point, the United States picked up the phone. So no.
Those ones are
not that one.
Not that one.
Wrong one. You have too many investments in Kenya. Not that one. Anyone else.
As we continue, I just wanted to share some of the books that we were using, and Brother Adesoji, you can lift up yours. For the research today, I put them in the chat. General History of Africa, edited by Ali Mazrui. Africa, and that's the 8th volume, volume 8. And then there's sorry, I have quite a bit here. Africa, a modern history by Guy Arnold. Adesoji, what books do you have there for our audience?
Only one which I got during the pandemic. It's titled
The Real Politics of the Horn of Africa by Alex D. What?
The Wall.
The Wall.
Yeah.
Yes, he's good, actually. I recommend that. I'm going to be honest with you, my compatriots, and our viewers. I'm doing more research to see what type of books, we should promote. I find that books that don't have like a historical analysis, doesn't give as much,
a full grounding.
Yes, in understanding,
Yes.
So, but there are few of them, unfortunately, because what happened is at some point, as neoliberalism took hold, they defunded all the departments that used to teach critical history or critical economics. So, like, if he lived today, it would probably be very difficult for Walter Rodney to get a job in an African university. You see, sadly.
Yeah. I mean, it started before he died. That just literally started before he died. Yeah.
Yes. A Professor Claude Ake, would be difficult for him
before he was murdered. I should say before he was murdered.
In an African university, you see?
Yeah.
Because now they only fund, these foundations fund institutions that just teach neoliberal economics, much like in the United States.
I was about to say, let's connect it to the fight against critical race war theory and the Florida and all. We think it's a small state because you've never gone and caught a flight out of there, but it's so connected to the global.
It's a global
policies.
Global process. So that's why it's tough to find books that are, and that's why we keep going back to
the ones that we always share.
Exactly. We keep talking about how Europe underdeveloped Africa because since then there's been a dearth of those kind of productions of books.
Funny enough, you should mention that when an author comes out and he says, "Oh, I'm writing this," and my interest basically is political economy of African. So when they come out with the book, the first thing I do is I'll go to Amazon and I'll go to the back page. I'll go to the index. The index will tell me. The index will immediately tell me whether this guy is just fluff or
very good.
Explain to the audience, because that's a nice tip you're sharing, Brother Adesoji, and Brother Alimadi can share well the best way to do your research and to know that a book is legit. Explain that in detail.
So, being the son of late journalists, when he comes on with a book, the first thing he does, he will scroll through the index. Yes. So when he goes through the index, he will say, okay, this person has referenced this person.
Exactly.
Who has this person also referenced? Who has that one referenced? And who has that one referenced? And then he builds a body of, okay, this is authority. Then he goes to the front and goes and sees the content. So when you tie the content and the index, you know whether the book is rich or not. So you could just like, nah, I don't want this.
And it's funny you say that because he references him.
There you go. That's it. Yeah. So you don't, I mean, it's not that the new knowledge is not out there. It's just that new knowledge, but with a historical lens. You have to be able to see. You have to be able to
connect the dots.
Right. Exactly.
Otherwise,
I mean,
because these things did not start yesterday, right?
Exactly.
Right.
You're gonna find out. Yeah. Go on.
Otherwise, the information is harmless. If it's not piece, it's like almost like the jigsaw puzzle. They can throw it in front of you. Say, okay, there you go, and you're sitting there. When in fact, if you piece it together, it could literally tell you, oh, if you open the door, there's gold on the other side. But unless you piece it together.
You've been watching too many movies, Brother Alimadi.
No, it's true.
Watching too much of Tomb Raider.
We have so much information in front of us.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
They're not worried about that. They only get worried when you start connecting.
Pointing them.
Showing
That's
the people
it.
the path.
That's it.
Showing the path to them, like you were saying, as Brother Desoji was, because I mentioned that Sudan was cooperating with the U.S. and the U.S. should have taken off the sanctions. And Brother Desoji was explaining you could not trust, which is true. The two things are true, actually. You could not trust Sudan. But Alimadi is telling us, no, there's a back door to the U.S. that you missed. and it was there, and some people knew about it. And this is what Brother Alimadi and Brother Adisoji are saying. If you take some books, you will learn about that back door, and you will use it to go all the way to the US, who have been the US, the UK, France. In Sudan, we forgot to mention France. Total is there, exploring for oil and digging for oil. When the South was begging for exploration of oil to stop so that they can have peace, Total continued the work.
And also, and also, if you notice, we're talking about Sudan, but you can't talk about Sudan without talking about the influence of the British. When one of the key stubborn areas that they couldn't conquer until they came back the second time was Darfur, because of the Mahdis. So once the Mahdis pushed back against the British, the British said, you know what, we're going to effectively make you a backwater. They defunded that area of resource and everything. So that area became, how do they survive if there's no resource? They basically became guns for hire.
Always punishing the revolutionaries, right?
Yeah, so it became guns for hire. So Omar Bashir then, a couple of 100 years later, comes back, looks at the history of the place and, okay, all right, I'm going to take from here. So he builds on history. And that's the history that is missing when your 7 o'clock news beat comes up. Oh, we're reading you the news, and news reaching us from Sudan is this, that. Boom.
But they don't explain the reason.
No context, nothing. So you're left scratching your head, and then you keep going on with the same narrative. Oh, it's just Africans, that's how they behave.
Yeah, barbarians.
Because you've already created that narrative through your media that Africans do not know how to behave. So, Brother Alimadi, any last words?
Total, and this is what I want, our sisters and brothers, our friends, compatriots to think about carefully. A couple of years ago, we were getting the beheading by ISIS was big news, right? It was on TV every day, right? So did they just develop a habit or got tired of cutting off people's heads? Why is it no longer on the news? Wasn't that the Ukraine version of news a couple of years ago?
Yep.
Right? Yep. Okay. About a year ago, a lot of beheadings was in the news from an African country. I don't know if sister and brother, you remember. It was Mozambique.
Yeah.
It was Mozambique. Total is developing the largest gas facility in Mozambique, right?
In all those places you mentioned.
Multi-billions of dollars, right? And the people who inhabit the area where the gas was found were literally pushed away with no compensation, right? The workers working the good jobs in the company were brought by Total. And Total was asking for intervention of international force because these so-called insurgents were cutting off people's heads, right? They got the intervention. Now suddenly there's no story about people cutting off heads. So it makes you wonder. Somebody could even be cynical enough to think, wait a minute. Who was really cutting off people's heads? Or who was getting people to cut off people's heads? Because when you are cutting off people's head as part of a strategy, how can it stop just like that? Think about that.
And especially because Mozambique is not.
I want you to use your, common sense and your own intelligence. I'm not suggesting anything that sounds too conspiratorial, but I'm giving you the facts. Heads were being cut off. Total wanted intervention to secure, in fact,
his interest,
like a zone.
Yeah.
That's supposed to be
exclusionary zone.
No Mozambican is supposed to be allowed within that zone. now Total is busy working on its multi-billion-dollar gas thing. Think about it.
And for whatever this means, as we talk about this, because this is happening also in Sudan, in Mozambique, in Sudan, and all these other places, even underneath that is the Wagner Group. Again, Russia comes in. So these people are bringing their wars into Africa. And while they fight over the resources, we're still having the Berlin conferences happening as we speak. That's what is really playing out. Africans are dying in the hundreds of thousands.
I have to say this. That's why I see value, tremendous value in this conference that I just came from. The State of the World Black Conference number 5.
Let's use the last minutes for you to share about that, please.
Hosted by Professor Ron Daniels of the Institute of the Black World 21st Century, where you had conscious Pan-Africans from this country, from the Caribbean, from the African continent, from South America, from Colombia, our African sisters in Colombia who have been neglected for centuries. You know, one of the first senators, you know, who looks like me, you know, a sister with my hue, came and spoke, and we shared how we need to work collectively in exposing some of these non-stories that are manufactured to keep us, you know, in bondage, but also how we can work collectively to amplify our struggles, right? Because that sometimes protects us sometimes too, when we're all talking about it at the same time. We discuss Haiti, what's going on in Haiti and the intervention we need, how we can help put pressure on the Biden administration, the Congressional Black Caucus, you know. It was so empowering, but very constructive and useful as well. So in our next episode, I might, you know, share another 2 or 3 minutes on what transpired.
Nuggets.
But those are the kind of things we need to. If we are separated and we see our struggle as different issues, we can't succeed. And that's why I'm glad we had a focus on Sudan today, so we can also, you know, amplify the struggle of our sisters and brothers in that country.
I was just saying thank you to the Walter Rodney Foundation for always joining us as you were finishing that up. But as you talk, and I'm always someone to put this out there, we, the three of us, are talking about having a conference at the end of September, hopefully this year.
Yes,
and we can bring all those people and others.
I filled the application already. I just update. Go ahead.
Right? Go. I mean, if you want to put the updates up, you can let us know.
No. I filled the application, so they're going to let me know if they can confirm those dates.
Awesome. Yeah. So the idea is to bring all these people together because, as I thank the Walter Rodney Foundation, the goal is this is a foundation that is doing the same work we are doing. We find other foundations and we come together and unite this work because we will not win individually as small foundations, but together we can do so much more. Brother Adesoji, you have anything in closing?
Again, a very insightful topic. We had a guest who was versed in the politics of the place and also the underlying currents of what happens. Again, very engaging conversation, and hopefully we'll see everyone next week.
Yes. Hopefully we see you next week. Hopefully we finalize the details to this conference, and hopefully we see you all at the conference so that we can actually put some action items in place. Asanteni,
groundings.
Let's keep the fight going even as they try to stop us. They will never stop us. Have a nice day all. A blessed day.